land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, and I saw above me that endless skyway, I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps in the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. All around me, a voice was a-sounding, this land was made for you and me. There was a big high wall there that tried to stop me. The sign was painted, said private property, but on the backside it didn't say nothing. This land was made for you and me. When the sun comes shining, then I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust cloud rolling. A voice was chanting as the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.
From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. The title of our episode is Labor Day 2018. We have a number of things here. We'll be looking at the latest developments in the NFL owners versus Colin Kaepernick. The arbitrator in that particular episode has determined that Mr. Kaepernick can go forward in his claim of collusion against the NFL owners, all 33 of those, and also the sports shoe maker Nike has decided to use Colin Kaepernick's image for their 30th anniversary of Let's Do It. This is an important development for labor, football players, and other athletes, the NBA, etc. Remember, they are workers, and they identify for the most part as workers. And of course, football had always been a working class sport, and so is baseball. Most of the people in baseball at one time came out of the working classes, whether it be from the U.S. or from the Caribbean or from Cuba or from other points in the Americas, and now Japan and Korea. But nonetheless, we have the same situation. We'll hear now from Richard Trumka. He is the head of the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor. And here we go.
Nation trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada will continue this week after talks between the White House and Canada stalled amid some bitterness. Joining us now to discuss the potential fallout for American workers is the president of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka. Mr. Trumka, President Trump has negotiated a new NAFTA deal with Mexico, but talks with Canada stalled after some off-the-record comments that he made were published, that he acknowledged that he won't make any concessions to Canada. And here's what he said about that afterwards.
Here's the good news. At least Canada knows where I stand. Because we can't have these countries taking advantage of the United States anymore. It's very simple.
Question, can you support a deal that leaves Canada out of a new NAFTA, and will Congress pass it?
Well, Chris, before I get to that, just let me say, on behalf of the hardworking men and women of this country who wake our country up every day, make her run all day, and put her to bed at night, let me wish you a happy Labor's Day and all your listeners a happy Labor Day. Look, our economies are integrated. The 3 countries in North America, the economy is pretty integrated. And it's pretty hard to see how that would work without having Canada in the deal. You said that the Mexican deal is closed. There's still a lot of work to be left to be done, even on the Mexican deal, Chris, because the language isn't drafted. We haven't seen whole chapters of the thing. We're anxious to move forward with it and anxious to have all 3 countries involved, because NAFTA has had a devastating effect on the working people of this country for the last 25 years. So we've been aggressively pursuing an agreement that works for the workers in all 3 countries, and I can say we're not done yet.
Okay, but let's talk about the parts of the deal we do know about that the Trump administration has negotiated with Mexico that it seems to me would be pretty good for workers. Let's put them up on the screen. 75% of a car's value would have to be manufactured in North America. That's up from 62.5%. 40 to 45% of the car must be made by workers in whatever country earning at least $16 an hour. Do you support both of those provisions? And frankly, do you think that Mexico would live up to them? For instance, the salary for car workers, because in Mexico right now, the salary for a car worker on average is $3 an hour. Do you think they actually are going to boost that to $16 an hour?
Well, first of all, those provisions can be very, very good. And you said that the current provision is really 62.5. In actuality, Chris, it's only in the 40s. Because they do a little cheating, saying if you put in 62% and China puts in 38%, it counts as 100%. So it's really lower, and the change is really more effective. We haven't seen the details of it yet, but you hit the nail right on the head. It doesn't matter what's in that agreement. If we can't monitor it and affect it and enforce it effectively, then the agreement will fail for workers and it will fail for the country. So what we're pushing right now, and we're working with Ambassador Lighthizer, is a way to let us effectively monitor what's going on the ground and then enforce the agreement regardless of who's in the White House. Because we've been told for over 25 years, trust us, this agreement will be good for workers. What we need is an agreement that we can enforce no matter who's in the White House. That's what we're looking for.
Let me step back for a minute and go broader view. How does big labor feel about President Trump at this point? I mean, the fact is growth is up, unemployment is down. He's using tariffs to try to break down trade barriers that I know that you hate. So, I mean, what mark do you give Donald Trump on this Labor Day weekend?
You know, when he was elected, I said I would call balls and strikes. When he did something that was good for workers, we'd support him. When he did something that was bad for workers, we would oppose him. Unfortunately, to date, the things that he's done to hurt workers outpace what he's done to help workers. He hasn't come up with an infrastructure program that could put a lot of us back to work. He overturned a regulation that would actually denied over 5 million people overtime that they would have had. He overturned some health and safety regulations that will hurt us on the job. Enforcement of OSHA and MSHA isn't what it should be. So we keep trying to find areas where we can work with him and where we can.
Mr. Trumka, let me ask you. I mean, 3.9% unemployment, 3.5 million jobs created, 4.2% GDP in the last quarter. I mean, don't you give them something for that?
No, those are good. But wages have been down since the first of the year. Gas prices have been up since the first of the year. So overall, workers aren't doing as well. He passed the tax bill that encourages companies to outsource. We can't agree to support something like that. Every place we can, Chris, we do. But unfortunately, right now, the scale is weighted against him because he's done more to hurt workers than to help workers.
So you have launched a new big political campaign for the midterms. You have an ad out on the web right now. Is it your hope that Democrats would take back control of the House and Senate and block the Trump agenda, even those parts that have been good for workers, like creating 3.5 million new jobs?
It's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about electing people that will support working people in this country. That's what we're looking to do. We started a couple of months ago going door to door, member to member with our members, saying what issues are important to you. We put those together. We're going to put them in front of candidates. Those candidates that support the issues that our members say they want, need, and should have are the candidates that we'll support. It probably will be Democrats because, unfortunately, Democrats support working people more than Republicans have. We'd like to change that, but the reality is Democrats support working people more than Republicans, although we go candidate by candidate, and we support those Republicans that support working people.
Finally, this week, I looked at the presidential exit polls from 2016. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in union households by just 9 points, 51% to 42, which, interestingly enough, is the smallest Democratic advantage since Reagan ran against Mondale in 1984. Question, don't a lot of your members, union members, don't they support Donald Trump?
Well, actually, 3 percentage points more of our members voted for Donald Trump than they did for Mitt Romney. Unfortunately, 10% of our members, 10% fewer of our members voted for Hillary Clinton. They didn't believe her on trade. They didn't believe her on a couple of other issues. But you talked about households. Union members themselves are a much higher percentage in there. Again, we give them all the facts. And I believe in my membership, the rank and file, that when they get the facts, they make the right decision every time. We're giving them the facts on this president and anybody who's running against him, and they'll ultimately decide which one of those candidates that they want to support.
Mr. Trumka, thank you. Thanks for sharing part of this Labor Day holiday weekend with us. We'll stay on top.
That was Mike Wallace of Fox News. Many of you will recall his father, Mike Wallace, who was legendary and was at CBS News. Richard Trumka has been the president of the AFL-CIO for many years. Before that, he was president of the Mine Workers Union, coming out of Pennsylvania. He has been basically a progressive type on the scene, Richard Trumka. Some of his policies have not suited as well with some of the rank and file. But on average, the AFL-CIO has been a voice for working people. It was much more a voice even on the conservative name George Meany. George Meany came out of the Plumbers Union, but when the NAACP was facing extinction in Alabama, it was a civil suit on a secondary boycott. I remember that. We were around there in the Huskins at the time. Nonetheless, they set the surety bond at $1 million cash, and George Meany got the money and saved the NAACP. Now, George Meany was a conservative, but at the same time, he played a valuable role in history. And the NAACP marched on to to beat the drum another day, and it is one of the oldest civil rights organizations. It is the oldest in the U.S., and it was founded out of the inaugural movement by the academic W.B. Du Bois, who was the first African-American to get a Ph.D. from Harvard. He wrote an extensive study on African-Americans in Philadelphia. And he ended up his career working on Encyclopedia de Africa, and he was also a member of the Communist Party of the United States. A little bit of the background here as we move along. Incidentally, DJ Trump attacked Richard Trumka, saying that Richard Trumka basically was worthless to working people. Now, if you notice the interview Mr. Trumka gave, I say Brother Trumka, gave there, he walked the middle of the road very, very carefully, because part of the problem they have in even union households, some union members fell, I should say, for the rhetoric of DJ Trump. There's no doubt about that. And the AFL-CIO represents many different kinds of workers. And so does the Teamsters Union, who is now back with the AFL-CIO. They even represent, in some instances, police officers, law enforcement types, prison guards, you name it. There's a big variety of them out there. So trade unionism is not what it was at the time of the early 1900s and in the 30s. John L. Lewis. John L. Lewis, incidentally, was also he was the head of the CIO. But nonetheless, he was out of the Mine Workers Union also. So that's when we had trade unionism that actually meant something. Over the years, when they combined together the AFL-CIO, American Federation of Labor, and the CIO, you then got, but Labor got more in the bed with various administrations. They even went on an anti-communist campaign when we had something called Solidarity. That was like Valenza in Poland. That was a right-wing trade union movement. And people have to understand where some of these movements are going. And as I think we were brought up the in instance, and there's been many instances in congressional districts, we were thinking of Minnesota 1 because the candidate in Minnesota 1, Waltz, is running for governor of Minnesota. But that particular district went in southern Minnesota down closer to the Iowa border, went for Barack Obama 2 times. And this time around, DJ Trump won that particular situation. So a lot of what happened there, we've talked about it before on this Labor Day. And to remember what has went on here, the issues that Bernie Sanders brought up were the kinds of issues that were germane to, I've used that term a long time, to working people. Hillary Clinton and her type of petty bourgeois campaign did not address working people. In fact, she did focus groups. She did very managed type of campaign events. Very few events she did that were spontaneous, except when she was doing the 911 memorial down at Ground Zero and literally had walking pneumonia and virtually almost fainted. That will happen to anyone. But her campaign was hounded by a number of things. Idiotic mistakes. Only an idiot would have a Clinton server, especially with her reputation as Crooked Hillary. But beyond that, voter suppression played a bigger role in her campaign because in many places, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, the vote was suppressed, no doubt about it, particularly amongst African Americans and Latinos with all these many voter ID operations, almost to the point that one had to carry a passport along with them to prove they were a U.S. citizen, and the extreme gerrymandering that went on in places like Michigan, because the Republicans had control of Michigan. You imagine Michigan, the home of the United Auto Workers, is now a right-to-work state. Why did this happen? A lot of grassroots organizing by these right-wing elements in Michigan, militias. The problem with the militias was, and the Tea Parties and all those people, they supported rabid capitalism. They did not denounce capitalism for the most part. Now, Sarah Palin talked about crony capitalism. It's a little different brand, but that is what they have been running. We call it state capitalism. Came out on Salazar, if you want to go back that far. But that has been in vogue since in Eisenhower. And then it went on, not so much on when LBJ was president, nor JFK, John F. Kennedy, but it came back onto Tricky Dick, and it really blossomed under Bill Clinton, the so-called public-private partnerships. You see those in Chicago and many other places that no matter if they're Republican mayors or Republican governors or Democratic governors, they beat the trail as fast as they can to these quote-unquote partnerships between business and government, where business wins out, government, which is the people, loses out, period. So then we also have a situation is, if you notice Mike Wallace, his produces big labor. Well, labor is not as big as it used to be. Maybe it could be called tiny labor. And if it's up to DJ Trump, if he could destroy the federal workers unions, he's already kicked them out of federal buildings, and they have the Supreme Court packed up now. They could take away, as Mr. Long used to say, the deduct box. That's the union dues. In some states, if you have if there are political elements, and all things, incidentally, are political. So thus, if a person does not want to join a union, they don't have to. And unfortunately, many people in the working class have been taught the idea that you save. Well, it depends. Obviously, it is prudent to save at times, but these people are working, and stashing their cash in these banks and shadow banking institutions. For what reason? Who knows? They pay their union dues. Many of them, however, unless the union does donate to progressive candidates, they do not. Some do actually work for progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders, but in some instances, the majority do not. So there needs to be better political education in the trade unions so that people understand political economy much better than they do now. Many of these people have been bamboozled into thinking that they are part of the middle class. They are really not. But now the middle class itself is being destroyed, at least how it's defined here, from a sociological and economic standpoint. We're basically talking about people that make $50,000, and that keeps going up to 60 or 70, 80,000. The majority of those people actually voted for DJ Trump. Those are the kinds of people that are quote-unquote in the middle class, but it also takes in some instance, people that make, say, 30,000, and some that make less than 30,000. And then you have the social, logical dynamic that people that are educated in this society. There are many people in this society that have PhDs, master's degrees, and what have you, and make $30,000 or less. So there's not any income equality as far as education is concerned. And education in this society has been put up as a ladder for social mobility, they call it. And in some instances it is. People that lack secondary or high school training have problems today motivating, or I should say not motivating, but navigating many of the workplaces. But now we have in our polls people are some college. We don't know what some college is, but again, these are all things that people use in navigating the job environment. And there are other people that are in the environment that salespeople, etc., that make $50,000 to $80,000 a year, but in terms of their economic education, it is not what it should be. They lack historical significance, generally speaking, and many more things that we used to say would go. Now, this is not being elitist, that would go with being a middle class person. At least the middle class at one time had a certain degree of miseducation, if anything. And now there is obviously, because of the condition of the schools since Ronald Reagan, the education system itself has been downgraded. Not only downgraded, there are large swaths of people that assume they know what education is and what knowledge is. We'll say that they're a little bit different things. And they're anti that. But they assume, back the old 50s terms, the pointed heads are getting them. But now there are more pointed heads than ever before. Lion Ted Cruz comes from Harvard University. And many of these other characters come from Harvard, Yale, the Ivy League, or from Stanford, or you name it, they're from it. But the situation is education and knowledge itself is becoming more and more commoditized, and some people have been left behind. And the economy, Richard Trumka talked about the economy and where people were and how they at least are educating the people in the AFL-CIO, going door to door, seeing which issues are for them. And most people, education rates pretty high. Even in Wisconsin, Boss Walker is running literally on being the education governor, if you believe that, for re-election. In Florida, plastic manufacturing. No, wait a minute. Sorry about that. That's in Wisconsin. In Florida, he made his dough down there. Scott running nursing homes and medical facilities. But nonetheless, he's running for Senate now, and he's running around down in San Juan and places like that, basically trying to be a kind and gentle Republican, but at the same time avoiding DJ Trump, but not alienating his supporters. And that is a whole new ball game. A lady was telling me in Florida, and that's the governor's race down there, Andrew Gillum, and what has happened to him, DeSantis calling him a monkey, the monopoly press labeling him Bernie Sanders' boy, basically speaking. But you have to understand a little bit of the history of Andrew Gillum. He was a surrogate, or whatever you want to call it, for Hillary the Monster Clinton at one time. And he was labeled that, and it was a thing of pride. But now, because of circumstances, he's forced to be Andrew Gillum. And now his people, and he organizing around Florida A&M, etc., the followers of O.J. Simpson, that is his base, then moving to Latinos, and then moving to millenniums, the Bernie Sanders people, getting all those people together, block by block, precinct by precinct, town, city, etc., and getting those forces together. Then they will be able to deal with other forces, some of the other candidates that will support them. They have Gwen Graham there, her supporters. Will they support Andrew Gillum? Some of them will, some of them won't. I don't know the percentages. Assume his campaign will want to split 50-50 with those. And then you have the two billionaire types ran against him, Levine and Green. Will their supporters support him? Probably not. He'd probably be lucky to get 20% of those people. And then the independents, can he get 30 or 40% of those? And this is how you do the campaign marketing up. But first, your situation is, particularly in Florida, I believe it's 1994, it would have been, I just thought of him, he passed, but he was the governor there in Tallahassee. Not thinking of Bob Graham, he was the governor. At one time, Lawton Childs. Anyway, Lawton Childs was a very good governor. He was there, a progressive governor in Florida, and I believe he was the last one there in the state of Florida. So the Democratic Party has not organized properly to run a statewide race in Florida, with the exception of the Senate. Now, there's Bill Nelson. The Gillum campaign will help Bill Nelson. There's no doubt about that. So we see that coming out of it, because you're having massive organizing situation. But you first have to get organized before you start talking about getting a victory. He's a long ways from the victory, and he understands that. And then he has the shatter of the government corruption investigation in the Tallahassee government there, involving some people. And will the Trump Justice Department wait till the last minute, as they deal with the Hillary, and come up with some indictments of people close to him or whatever? And that could sabotage the race. That's one of the things in a race of this nature. Political consultants, the old type political consultants, would use a checklist 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they would find out the vulnerabilities of their candidates. and how they could run around that. But if you have something out there, it's very similar to what happened in Minnesota. If anything else about that situation with the Attorney General's race and Keith Ellison. There's a video involved. A woman that made the charge said she did not make the video available. But we don't know if that could turn into an October surprise or not turn into an October surprise. That is really not what you want to do. You don't want to get into a problematic candidate, particularly when the stakes are as high as they are. Nonetheless, let's go to some of the other news of Labor Day. Other things have obviously occurred and continue to occur. In Seattle, teachers get 10% raise in tentative deal. Suspense in other districts. This was, let me see, on the 1st of September. A tentative 1-year contract could cost 10.5% raise for 6,000 Seattle public school workers, according to an email sent out. The deal reached late Friday also included 5 additional days of paid parental leave for teachers and substitutes, classified workers, and office personnel. School will start as scheduled on Wednesday. That will be tomorrow. It was signed by Phyllis Capapano and Michael Tomejo. Anyway, those are the people that signed it, and the district confirmed the information in an email. The message noted that the union's 2015 to 2018 contract had been extended through the 9th of September. Under the old contract, Seattle teachers earned between $50,000 and $100,000. A 10% raise would change the salary range from $50,000 to $55,984 and $111,340. That is out of Seattle. Now let's roll along here. We'll go to some of our left-wing publications. This is the People's World. Midterm 2008, stakes for labor could be higher, no doubt about that. You hear it every election cycle from union leaders, workers, and activists. This election is the most critical. Pick one year or decade. But in 2018, they may be right, and not because of Congress changes hands, but because the 2018 outcome, state by state, has the potential to redraw the nation's political map for decades or more, and it has nothing to do with who's in Congress right now. There are 435 members of Congress, 35 senators. These are who the voters will be electing, and most importantly, 36 of the nation's 50 governors, plus thousands of state legislatures out there. All but a handful of those 2018 gubernatorial winners will be sitting in their chair in 2021. Want proof? Look what happened in 2010, an off-year election, a combination of Democratic apathy, and Republican heat of Democratic President Barack Obama, apathy towards the Affordable Care Act, the slow recovery from the Depression, and aided seemingly going to the rich, but not the rest of us. The Tea Party trilogist combined to produce a Republican sweep. I'll have to look that word up. It hasn't happened. It didn't happen. That organized labor focused much on holding Congress, which failed in 2010. That downplayed the state legislative saying off-year elections like 2010 and 2018 feature a low turnouts and often which side it can motivate its partisans to vote. And in generally speaking, particularly in the African-American community, not as much emphasis is to the down ballot. And there are historic reasons for that. In many states, the state legislatures, particularly in the Midwest, there are not sufficient numbers of African Americans in the state legislatures, whether it be House or Senate, or for that matter, holding statewide offices under the governor's commissioner of this, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's no impetus out there for people to vote in those elections. Now we have in large and mid-sized states, they named Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Alabama, and Missouri legislatures. The reddest Indiana has become deep red. Conservative GOP Christie ran New Jersey. Well, that was the case, and that unfortunately happened there. New Jersey has a lot of very, very small towns, and a lot of those people in the small towns make their money in New York around Wall Street. Control in Minnesota and Nevada has been swinging back and forth. In 2014, a weak Democratic governor lost to an extreme right-wing governor, and that was Bruce Rimmers in Illinois. While the governor's chair in deep blue Massachusetts and in Maryland went to moderate Republicans. That should never have happened. Though all three legislatures stayed Democratic, only New York, where control was split, and the West Coast solid blue seem to stay immune from the GOP tide. In New York, though, disgrace there. As Cynthia Nixon said, unfortunately, the governor there playing patty cake with the Republicans. Start with the right to work for less laws, repeal of project labor agreements in right-wing Wisconsin. That's on the Boss Walker, the infamous Act 10, which emasculated state public workers' union and nationwide added cuts in working comp / state pensions. Continued with school vouchers. Now, that was an unfortunate situation with these school vouchers and charter schools. That was under the Obama administration. One of the worst things that could happen there. Period. An absolute fiscal and political disaster for workers in Kansas. That was under Sam Brownback. That's interesting, though. Sam Brownback was one of the principal movers of the Dr. King Memorial. A Catholic. Anyway, so this is some of it here. One development could hurt workers and allies. People are very angry with DJ Trump, not angry enough. But since this article, things have started to happen. The Tier 1 states are those Trumka said in a pre-Labor Day session with reporters that have the trifecta of races, contest for U.S. Senate and governors, as well as the House. So we're looking at those trifectas there. The trifecta states are amongst the most important and obvious for control there in Ohio, where the Democratic Party has not been properly organized. Michigan is another one. Pennsylvania, the organization is getting better. And in New York, particularly since Cynthia Nixon came in, New York is getting properly organized. In California, people like Senator Fluke out there are doing better. But they still have Dianne Feinstein running around there in the Senate race and have not gotten her out of there yet. In Wisconsin and Illinois, without a Senate race, Minnesota, which has 2 open seats, in Texas and Florida, growing. Georgia has an open governor's seat there, and that is where we have an African American running in there. And in Missouri, Claire McCaskill, Joe Meacham. In West Virginia, Heidi Heitkamp. In North Dakota, which Trump won by 35 points. Joe Donnelly, the sheriff in Indiana, he's in some trouble there. He's trying to play a little patty cake with Trump, but not enough patty cake. Claire McCaskill's a different situation there. They are neck and neck down there with the Attorney General. But one of the things that could be a very bright spot for Claire McCaskill, Missouri had a referendum on right to work, and it was defeated handily by 66% in the red state of Missouri. Now, in Illinois, features the most unpopular governor in the country, right-winger Bruce Ramos. He's running against a so-so candidate in the Democratic Party. And, of course, down Stacey Adams in Georgia, a different situation. And this is state by state. John Kirsch, of course, he is Andy there. Richard Cadre, who should have stayed at the Financial Protection Agency. Later, anyway, he's running against Mike DeWine. DeWine is a Republican. Been around for a very, very long time. There, Cadre, but he appears to be too low-key on the campaign trail and lost to DeWine, in a statewide contest. DeWine, in turn, is more conservative than John Kirsch, but John Kirsch was conservative. Let's not get that out. He won the second term by a 2-to-1 ratio. Sherrod Brown is running there. Sherrod Brown has a better chance of winning his race. In Minnesota, that's retiring there, and we already mentioned that particular fellow there. And we talked about other things there. In the state of California, Newsom, not very enthusiastic about Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom was a lieutenant governor. He was former mayor of San Francisco, but took away the benches and tried to ban the homeless from panhandling. So there's a jungle primary there. Ensures a Democrat incumbent, Dianne Feinstein, in second place. Finisher, State Senator Kevin DeLeon would win the Senate race. The GOP got shut out of that contest. So that is Louisiana. Incidentally, also has a jungle primary there. Now Arizona, this guy Doug Ducey, he's running against a progressive there, and then you have in the Senate race Martha McSally, a Republican, but denounced Trump and then came back. Kirsten Simmer is running to to succeed Jeff Flake. So the Trump majorities have been shrinking there for a very long time. In Nevada, now this is a state that Hillary the Monster Clinton carried. This Dean Heller, the most extinct one there, thanks to huge turnout of culinary workers in Las Vegas. And by a slimmer margin to that of Barack Obama. And this is so forth and so on. Now, Maryland, I won't spend much time on this, but there is Ben Cardin is running there anyway. And let's see who else is running. New York. We won't finish all of this alt. We'll just move on here. As we picked up some of this. Labor Day history on Labor Day. Trump tried to kill overtime. And this is the Fair Labor Standards Act passed as part of the New Deal. It was passed in 1938 by FDR. The second New Deal, along with more pro-consumer, pro-worker legislation. Like other New Deal measures, right-wingers were strong in opposition. No doubt about that. They still are. Surprisingly, the legendary mine workers union, John L. Lewis, the most influential voice, said the minimum wage would become a ceiling, not a floor, on workers' wages. He opposed it, saying collective bargaining would do better for workers. But 3 years after became law, labor came around, if John L. Lewis did not. But one thing John L. Lewis did probably foresee that labor would run into these two-tier type of setups where one set of workers basically retain the old contract or elements of the old contract, and newer workers are in more of a minimum wage type tier. Now, among other reforms, we're all under the FLSA except for jobless benefits and old age pensions, both of whom were under the 1935 Social Security Act. Trump has spent attacking the FLA now, FLSA. So what's basically happening here, unless covered by union contract workers earning more than $23,000 per year, could be ineligible for overtime pay after working 40 hours. Now, that has been a scheme that even came up under G.W. Bush. Under Barack Obama, raising the eligibility ceiling all workers earning less than $48,000, tightening the supervisor exemption. That's another scheme going on there. And of course, the National Association of Manufacturers and Chambers of Commerce favor this. Obama's overtime rule died. Alex Acosta told senators he thought overtime pay eligibility ceiling of $32,000 yearly might be a way to go. The tipping minimum is $2.13 and hasn't risen for a quarter of a century. Theoretically, bosses are supposed to make a difference between the tipping minimum and the federal minimum, which is still sitting at $7.25, a disgrace for the country. So there are a number of things here, and that's the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's been around a very long time. They are wanting to tinker with it. This is a good day to talk about this. And let's not forget about Beth Lumpkin. She's 100 years old. She lives in the city of Chicago, and she was honored by the Chicago teachers, or at the Chicago Teachers Union Center to celebrate her 100th birthday. The most beloved labor activist in Chicago, Beatrice Beth Lumpkin, seasoned trade unionist. Has been around a long time. Young people who stole the night, including Lancaster Collins, a co-founder of Intergen, would pay homage to her. In other words, she cut her teeth on the Wagner Act in 1935. Beth and her fellow organizers, many of whom were members of the CP. Although she was only 19 at the time, she became one of 14 communists to be hired in 1937 by the newly found Congress of Industrial Organizations, that's the CIO, to organize laundry workers. The campaign ensured in the combination of organization ensued in the culmination of 30,000 laundry workers. Today, laundry workers are not organized, period. She found time to join marches to free the Scots Borough of Nine, the 9 youth framed in Alabama, and against the invasion of Ethiopia. She became a public school teacher at 47 and later became a tenured professor at Malcolm X College, where students demanded a more diverse curriculum. Beth became a researcher and publishing groundbreaking scholarship on microcultural roots of mathematics and science. Her late husband, Ben Lumpkin, always being a clown. Always bringing a cloud. I'm sorry about this. Chronicling her and her late and Frank's 17-year battle to hold 17-year battle Wisconsin Steel. I remember that campaign. It was in the 80s. Hundreds of Beth's longtime friends, comrades, union of women from Chicago Coalition of Labor. Period. There, children, grandchildren, they were all there Congress types that were there. Jesus Garcia was there. He's the elected congressman there in Chicago. So we honor Beth here and her contribution, no doubt about that period at 100 years old. A lot of us wish always bringing a crowd. It's the story of Frank Lumpkin. He was a steel worker, a fast-moving, fascinating, informed. This is a book here. We'll give it a plug. Account of an African-American communist and his family from Georgia and Florida to the Merchant Marines to Buffalo and then to Chicago. Never fight for your rights by yourself. Always bring a crowd. Yes, you definitely want to bring a crowd if you can get one. Here, he died incidentally in 2010 at 93. A very long-living family there, and we are happy to include this. We'll end this presentation with Colin Kaepernick and the new Nike commercial that is unveiled and campaign around him on the Just Do It. Colin Kaepernick once again will not be surfing anywhere as the NFL begins its season, no, because they are blackballing, but he will be on a TV. And the arbitrator as we reported earlier here, the NFL's request for dismissal of his collusion case did not happen. He'll be the face of CNN reported it, the face of the 30th anniversary of Just Do It campaign, while CBS Sports said a shoe and apparel launch soon to be come, accompanied by multi-platform advertisement push. So it'll be on social media, it'll be all over TV, and you have to remember this is a part of the heritage, a book I've been reading by Bruce, and I don't have the book here now. I don't remember his last name, but nonetheless, I shall review the book. Colin Kaepernick is back with Nike and with the company going with a social consciousness campaign. I am told a shoe and apparel launch is coming along with a national print ad. So this is a positive situation that is happening here for Colin Kaepernick. What is happening? The country is literally changing before our eyes, literally. And this is going against, as we said in our farewell to Aretha, Homegoing invites you to listen to that 1 hour or so editing of her funeral and some comments by us about the heritage of the Aretha was an activist. She worked directly with Dr. King. She sung at his rallies. She sung at shows, her and Harry Belafonte, to raise money for the Southern Leadership Conference. That would have been toast, so to speak. So it's a long situation there. She and Colin Kaepernick meet up together. There's also one here that we had with Serena Williams talking about the contribution of Colin Kaepernick. And some of these things we definitely need to remember. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did his part where he brings about the article, and we covered this, What Sports Has Taught Me About Race, as a picture of him with Muhammad Ali, James Brown, and Bill Russell, and many more. That they had a news conference on Ali's situation and where he was. And Aretha and the Star-Spangled Banner, we talked about that. And just a paragraph from E.J. Dionne Jr., 2 Labor Days into Trump's presidency, what happened to the working class after Labor Day of 2016. We heard again and again about how Trump was had frilled those who labored and heavily burdened, particularly those amongst the who were European. There were nonstop commentaries on how out of touch citizens in the big and prosperous metropolitan areas have become. At the time, you might have imagined Trump had become a Marxist candidate running against a creature of Wall Street. Well, he did, Hillary Rodham Clinton. And Solidarity Forever would be the nation's national anthem. It didn't happen. We don't hear much about the working class anymore. We get more reports on the Trump base overlapping quite different groups and how its members will stick with him. So let me finish up E.J. Dion here. Wide disparities in regional growth. There's no doubt about that. Not only between states, but within states. The already profound aggravate the already profound divisions that ail all of us. Racially uneven economic fortunes damage individuals and families. There is this and we'll wind this up, belief amongst a lot of people that in this particular society they are being clever. Now, there were people that voted for Trump out of a desire to improve their economic lot. But there were others that in positions that feel that they are very clever and they can exploit conditions that are now low unemployment, relatively low unemployment, but at the same time stagnated wages. But in some instances, depending on how close you are to Wall Street generally, salaries have been up. Period. People that make their money from the market, for the most part, their portfolios have been up. My mouth is getting out of water here. But anyway, those are some of the things that we see on this Labor Day 2018. I hope everyone had a Labor Day. We're finishing this up at the end of Labor Day. We had a full plate this weekend. We have an open source report, which is aired via WBRN and the Boston Red Network, and on iHeart, on YouTube, on Spreaker, and many more outlets. Even some of the smart speakers, they are there also. So the long list of that. Spotify, we are there around. So all of the programs are there. Numbers Man, that's another division of the Boston Red Network. That is our financial program, Be Precise Macroeconomics. That was also this weekend out there, and we finished up the tribute to Aretha Franklin. The title of that episode is Aretha's Work is Done. And also we did the week that was, that is on the Boston Red side of Political Report, and a Friday Java. So there's many, many programs. Check them out.